Oh, yeah, GM. We have Chris Carella here today. Hello, Chris.
Hey, Matt. Good to be here.
So this is a second episode of our conversations with the most active Kiwi curators, and Chris has been almost since the beginning, just like Misha, as far as I remember. And your like I felt like your support was also very important for Kiwi in terms of like historical perspective, because when we started, and that's a little known fact, we got two grants from Purple, and you were the one who encouraged us to apply for Purple grants. And these two one if grants back then was like, amazing money for like this little project of ours. So yeah, thanks for that, Chris.
Yeah.
So we're gonna to keep like the format more or less the same as we had in the first episode. So the first question I'm gonna ask is uh, how you got into crypto, because this is also something I have no idea. I
Yeah.
never asked you about it before.
So I'm going to tell the story in three parts here, which is I was very early crypto curious, early enough that I was the co-founder of the startup called Push when we were doing contextual computing, which was a little bit ahead of its time. And I have a Linux laptop, and I was able to mine Bitcoin on my Linux laptop, like like at a normal rate. It was a Linux bio. Like I don't remember what year it was. It was like this sleek metallic Linux bio. It was like an early Ultrabook, so it wasn't like particularly powerful, but it could mine Bitcoin, because back in the day, it didn't take so much CPU to mine Bitcoin. And I remember going to like the Bitcoin faucet page where you'd like click a button and it would give you like one Bitcoin every day. And then the sort of tragic story is that that was like this sort of computer science side interest of mine. And when it was time to upgrade my computer, like the Bitcoin was worthless. I didn't really think too much about it, and I just upgraded and lost my keys, and that was in a trash dump somewhere. Fast forward to like 10 years later, me checking every hard drive that I had, every backup, it's like, yeah, I just could never find that machine again. So at first it was like I was interested in computer science and sort of the early Satoshi white paper and the premise behind it, but I wasn't fully pilled on like, oh, this is a product that is actually going to happen. Although, just as a point of reference, there were lots of digital currencies trying to happen before the Satoshi white paper, and so there was really no reason for me to believe at that point that this was going to be the one that would work. But nonetheless, that was sort of phase one. Um, then phase two was when CryptoKitties came out, and I was totally interested. I think back now, it was like sort of beyond me that maybe I wasn't as attuned to Ethereum launching and smart contracts. Like I was, and again, I have a computer science interest, but I don't think kind of smart contracts really hit me until I saw CryptoKitties. And then I thought like, okay, great. These are all the same kinds of primitives from when I was interested in Bitcoin. Now, it's a Turing complete computer and we can build stuff. And then I literally tried to get a job. Like I kind of remember the job I was sitting in, I'm in one job trying to get the next job. And it was still so early. It was like all people were hiring was like you had to have your PhD in math to go join Consensus or I was in New York, and so I was looking at like the New York stuff. Yeah, we hadn't like fully switched to remote life. So it just like okay, this is not for me because I don't have my PhD in math and that. And also on the product side, you're like, God, there's so much broken here. How come they're not even hiring designers or product people? But it was just super early. Um, Sort of went back into my consumer internet life and doing that stuff. And then it was really then the third chapter, which is like what I think fully got me into crypto, is it was the pandemic, and I was working at a startup studio where I was head of product during this pandemic, and we we started to find our niche in consumer packaged goods, and so like I got very good at like spinning up Shopify sites and working with branding agencies and do everything, kind of all the 0 to 1 you need to ship a product, which in the end, I found myself doing something like I was just never really interested in. I think we can all kind of have a romance around physical products. But once I went down that rabbit hole, it was like, oh, I like have believed in software since I was 16 years old. Like I want to go back and build software. And so I left the startup studio. I was just kind of exploring what was out there, and actually I was doing a lot of painting. I had an art studio. It was during the pandemic where I had an art studio that was like down the road from my apartment, so I could like venture out there and they wouldn't try to arrest me or anything. And so I had like a second place to be during the pandemic, which was a like a huge blessing. And so I was going into my studio. I was painting a lot. I had my laptop. I got kind of fascinated about this idea of authenticating paintings. And I had known that there was like a bunch of crypto efforts at the time. And so I like sort of latched into like maybe NFTs as a way to authenticate my physical paintings, which I no longer think is a good idea. But that was sort of the itch, that I started scratching. And during that process, discovered NBA Top Shot. And NBA Top Shot was such an incredible product from a pure product perspective. The animations were beautiful, everything was quick, it just worked. It was totally, I was like, okay, now I'm interested in NFTs and art. And then I see the Top Shot experience, and it's like, okay, I can build in this space now. And so Top Shot is what made me realize that like someone with my skill set and interests, that the technology had developed enough where like I could have an impact. And so I was pilled. I was tweeting a lot about NFTs and culture and art. And then Tezos reached out to me, and it was TQ Tezos, which at the time was one of the big companies in Tezos, and founded, funded by the Tezos Foundation. And so they said like, hey, we're doing NFT stuff. We want to do art and culture. Your interests sort of are perfect here. With someone I had worked with in a kind of a different life of, in video games actually. And so then I joined Tezos in early 2021, joined the Tezos Foundation and like read and provided feedback on the initial NFT spec. So Tezos was just rolling out NFTs, and then joined the Open Minter project, which was the first piece of software where you could create NFTs. So I was like, okay, the spec was good, and then the network was upgraded, and then we built Open Minter. And being like the PM on Open Minter, it was like you're a PM of a pretty decentralized thing, but we were getting ready to launch, and then I just asked like, has anyone tested this on mainnet? And no one had tested it on mainnet, and so almost
Oh
like
my God.
partially with like my product hat on, was like, great, I'm gonna test this thing on mainnet. And then what I had like I was in my art studio, I took a picture of one of my paintings that was on the wall, and I minted it. And as a result, the first NFT minted on Tezos mainnet is one of my
Wow.
artworks.
Oh my God. Wow,
And
you're
so
like
it's just
a
kind of a
wow,
fun
that's a
thing.
historical piece.
Yeah, and then for the foundation, I started building an NFT platform that was tied to this New York City fashion uh, and culture marketing agency. And so we built this platform called Truby, and it was like hypebeasts were dropping their NFTs and Tezos through it. Around the same time, Hic Nuck came out, and I played around a bunch with Hic Nuck in that community, and have some artworks there. Um, Fast forward to maybe 6 months after we launched Truzy, TQ Tezos shut down. They sort of lost their funding from the foundation, or maybe another way to describe it is they broke it up instead of one large org into like 20 different orgs. And so my project had gone away. And then interestingly, that was like peak bull market. And it was like the same day that I announced I was leaving. Uh, and there weren't that many NFT marketplaces at the time. It was like I just got tons of job offers, like literally before I went to sleep. It's like the only thing that's ever happened to me in my life, which was like, hey, I'm leaving. I'm looking for the next thing. And it was like I had literal
Yeah,
job offers by the time that night ended. And a lot of those job
nice.
offers really were based on the fact that like NFTs were smoking hot. Um, but the dark side of it was that a lot of entrepreneurs raised money to build some of these NFT platforms, and then they didn't really have people to do it. And so, like, I was super interesting to them. but then they were not interesting to me. And I actually found that people were just not in it for the right reasons. It was like peak Carnival Barker. People were like very clear, easy to raise money and like attach a rapper's name to the project. But like they didn't really believe in it. So if it would have been a job, I would have got paid, but I didn't really feel like those were like for the right reasons. And I actually left crypto for a minute and went back to data science, which was something else I work in, and worked in a friend's startup building data science tools for musicians. And then it was when the bear market, I'll just say like that my exposure to crypto was NFTs and mostly Tezos. And then when I left and started doing data science stuff, then crypto became nights and weekends for me. I went deep down the Ethereum rabbit hole, like ended up in nouns. Um, and DAOs. That was like my interest all of a sudden shifted from like NFTs as art to like, okay, these are coordination primitives, and these things called DAOs are new attempts at coordinating and governing things. So then my nights and weekends, I was just super into DAOs. And then when the bear market came back around, I like just immediately wanted back in. It was like I saw everyone leave, and like a lot of those entrepreneurs who offered me these jobs, like I don't have no idea where they are, or like where those projects went or where that money went. But I just knew like, great, it's builder season. I love this stuff. I like truly believe in Ethereum. I want to jump back in, and I've been talking to my CEO at the data science company about it, and we were like pretty aligned. And then I met Charmverse, and they were building DAO tooling initially, and that was it. I was in, and so I joined Charmverse, and then I could keep going to like completely modern day here, but that is sort of like once I joined Charmverse, it was like Tezos. I was fully on crypto pilled, and then once I joined Tezos and organizations like Nouns and ultimately Optimism, it's like now I'm a lifer. I think there's just kind of nothing else I could imagine doing.
Yeah, I'm like, thanks for sharing this because I had no idea about like how long ago have you started and like all these, turns that you had in your story. And I really like the fact that you mentioned NBA Top Shot because I think that they don't get enough credit for basically kickstarting the bull market and NFT craze. Like I remember when I first saw it, I was like, well, it looks like a normal product, like non-crypto product. And it was so smooth and it was so normy because NBA was, cooperating there. And I actually haven't seen such a product yet in crypto for this bull market, something that would be like, oh, poly market maybe, but the UX is terrible on poly market. But with NBA Top Shot, it was like super smooth. You could pay
So
with a
good.
credit card and so on. So yeah, that's an important part of history.
Sometimes, it's like it's always a common question. Have you get started in crypto? And I have like, even like maybe since the distance from that moment for me, have been hearing more and more people on Twitter Spaces mentioning that like NBA Top Shot is the thing. And I was always like, oh, great, it wasn't just me. And then I started to realize like actually a lot of people saw NBA Top Shot and realized we can build really cool stuff here.
Yeah, and now there's this courtyard. It's like a platform for selling like collectibles, and
Incredible.
it's like huge thing right now.
Incredible. Yeah.
So yeah, that's I I'm happy that like this Trailblazers work wasn't lost and like people follow up here. I also want to mention this DAO part because this is how I know you. Like I knew you as a nouns guy, as a like decentralized governance, as a Charmverse person. So this is the way I understood what you do. So if you could expand a little bit, like what do you actually do? Like
Yeah.
what's Charmverse about and then your
Amazing.
work?
Yeah, yeah. I think kind of the most succinct way to describe right now is I'm the co-founder of Scout Game, and Scout Game is an on-chain incentivized open source development platform. And so uh, TLDR developers contribute to open source, and it's sort of a weekly competition, and at the end of the week, all the developers are ranked, and then they earn tokens. Right now, it's been points, but soon we'll launch a dev token, and so developers can earn tokens for um, one just doing their average everyday work, like a lot of developers on our platform, they just contribute to open source and now they have this second way of getting rewarded, or or look for specific repos in the Scout game system. And I'll say there's a talent engagement component because ecosystems partner with us and fund specific repos. And so, Stelo has been one of our big success cases to date, but they fund a bunch of Stelo repos where if you have a PR approved, not only do you earn dev tokens in Scout Game, you earn USDC. And if you fix their harvest issues, you can earn like 750 CUSDC. So now it's like we have developers playing the weekly competition, we have partners kind of incentivizing specific repos, and then there's a third part of it, which is scouts, which are your normal players that I would put myself in, where we scout developers, which is identifying their talent by buying their NFT, and then at the end of the week, you also get earned based on all of the NFTs you're holding. So that's like what I'm most currently doing, and to the point that have even sort of shut down a lot of my focus on some of my DAO activities. But I would love to talk about like a little bit the gap of how we got here from trimming Charmverse, because I think it's just sort of an interesting story that talks about Ethereum the last couple of years in general. And so joined Charmverse, and at the time a lot of people called us Notion for DAOs. And we do still have a very Notion-like paradigm. If you've ever used Notion, like Charmverse, it's like so obvious how to use it, the slash commands, everything's kind of the same. And then we were more focused on DAOs, and so we had voting elements to it. Both you could vote in the Charmverse platform, or you could connect to a third party like Snapshot. There was a token gating element and a permission systems around token gating, which is a really popular feature. There are like different types of rewards and bounties you can do, and so it had just like multi-sigs directly into it, so your DAO could pay people. And we built that with a vision of like there will be a million DAOs, certainly by now, and that just never really happened. And there was like a whole class actually. I think Charmverse was part of a class of DAO tooling. In fact, it was a meme for a while that like everyone wanted to build DAO tooling, and we just saw a lot of the other solutions didn't work out, and I think there's just, especially at the time, but maybe even today, there's just not a huge um, business market for DAOs. And DAOs are actually just very hard customers because it's who pays you. It's like they have to have a vote, you need a champion. But built an amazing tool and got involved in lots of communities around it and learned about a lot of different ways people run DAOs. And around kind of a similar time where it was like, oh, maybe this thing's not going to be huge yet, the Optimism Grants Council selected Charmverse to be their grants platform. Now, we didn't know anyone at Optimism. We were totally like, blind selected. And when they sort of reached out to us, said like, hey, you're like the closest thing that we need. Like, we've authorized you this in Notion, but here's all the reasons why Notion is not good. So Charmverse would be a good way for us to do this. Would you like help us and work with us? And then quickly realized that, like, as a grants platform, there were some additional capabilities, and so we started building a little bit towards that route. And then having the Optimism cosign made, like, overnight, tons of grants programs came to us, and to some extent,
Hmm.
if you were like fully on chain, you could do something like Gitcoin or Questbook, but if you have other needs, we became like the default solution. And so love grants. So tons of public goods funding, lots of grants ran and facilitated through Charmverse, and worked with those teams closely. Um, Through that process, sort of realized, man, a few things happened, but we sort of realized like grants are not the end game. There's like a lot of inefficiencies in grants, and ecosystems can do better. And there's a bunch of different approaches to this. And OP this season is trying their on-chain metrics and their GitHub metrics, which are actually pretty similar to what we're doing at Scout Game. But we sort of just realized like we have this grants platform. It's pretty stable. We have very few new feature requests. Lots of grants still use it, and so we knew we could put that on in sort of a maintenance or like a slow internet version. And then we were interested in building the next product, and we were interested in sort of solving this. Initially, it was about the grants that perform best actually have a referral. This is actually true of grants, of business, of you're trying to hire someone, but referrals are so strong. And then like grants, often you could start to predict performance if there was like a referral component to it. And partially with referrals, there's a lot of skin in the game. And so if you have reputation and you're sort of referring a project, you think it's a good project. It's like you don't do that lightly. Now let me just pause because that's all kind of things. Like grants programs run in tons of different ways. And so like while you could be thinking about like the OP grants program where there really is not necessarily a referral or retro funding, some chains and protocols just run straight private grants. And even the thing that we saw that was super interesting was some had scout programs, like venture capitalists have scout programs. And so if you were a grant scout, your job was to go find projects in the ecosystem and refer them to the grants program. Now that solves two problems for a grants program. What a grants program is good at is giving away lots of money, but that doesn't always attract the highest quality people. And so if you're like that's what I should say projects. If you are Optimism or Base, like you have no problems. Like your grant applications are great. The funnel is amazing. Um, if you're not one of them, you don't have the same kind of awareness. I mean, you're giving away tons of money. You're maybe not getting the same level of qualities, and so very quickly you realize like we're giving away way too much money to these teams that are less qualified. We wanted Aerodrome, but like we're getting a DeFi platform that no one's really using. Um, so if you're a scout, you're both trying to bring the best projects to the ecosystem for the sake of the ecosystem, right? And you're trying to help those projects get funded by the ecosystem. And so grant scouts, I think it's still sort of an experiment and not a super well-known thing.
Yeah,
Um,
like a lot to unpack here.
yeah, cool, yeah.
But yeah, like that helped me understand where did you come from, because like what I liked about Scout Game when I saw it was I think you launched a few months after this mania when everyone was launching this collectible, like collect cards with people and just it
Like the social
always went
fi
to
stuff.
zero.
Yeah,
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 it was
totally.
always like I felt like people will just launch it like 30 projects a year until I don't know people just get tired of it. And I felt like with Scout Game there's finally some substance there. It's not just like I'm betting on someone, but this person can actually do something. It's not
Yeah, there's like some
like pure
proof of work aspect
speculation.
to it. Totally.
Yeah.
I'd say that we were not inspired at all by the social fi stuff until we sort of landed on what we were building. And then we started to look at like, okay, what was everyone else done, in fact, by the way, there's a previous version of this app. I guess this is just how a lot of products get built. But the first thing we built was it was straight up a tool to connect projects to grants programs. And we were gonna like get your interest and maybe use a little AI to know that like we're not gonna notify you of every grants program. We're gonna notify you of ones that you're a good fit for. It's actually a pretty niche thing, but we had a lot of experience in Charmverse, like building, like understanding that, right? And so we started to build that. And then one tab was about referrals. Because then we were bringing that sort of in this system. Okay, now let's talk about referrals because we know that's so impactful. And then it was like 2 weeks, it clearly became the most interesting part of like this otherwise kind of
Hmm.
boring LinkedIn kind of app. And it also started getting bigger and bigger in scope. And then we just came to the decision of like, hey, this is the thing. We can always build the other stuff, but we need to focus on building this one really good. And so Scout Game was born out of the notion of wanting, like, what would referrals look at internet scale with crypto? I think it would be, internet citizens, um, vouching for specific developers, and then uh, when those developers get rewarded, the people who vouch for them get rewarded as well. And so that's like a very kind of intellectual take on what Charmverse is, and I mean on what Scout Game is. Actually, what we think it is going forward is this fun game and rewards and ecosystem rewards, and it's a good tool for DevRel. But eventually, you're building your reputation as a developer there, and so I think there's very much a kind of a talent matchmaking service down the road.
Okay. I just need to turn on the light because it's
Yeah,
getting darker
no
here.
worries.
So
Cool.
I'll be back in like 5 seconds. should be better now. Yeah. Yeah, I also like this VC scouting analogy because it's obvious for VC companies to pay for it. And at the end of the day, it's here. Like, I remember in the last bull run when you could get like $20,000 or like $30,000 for referring a smart contract engineer that gets hired.
Totally.
And it, like, these numbers were crazy. The highest number I ever seen was 75K for a
Yeah.
referral.
Yeah.
And there was obviously a demand there. And like, as you said, like if you're a base or a OP, yeah, you get a lot of applications. But if you're not, then uh, it's much harder. And I think especially if you want to target some local communities, because you spoke about Cello, right? And as far as I know, Cello is very active in Africa. I'm wondering if you have any like experiences with, helping them out there. Something that might be interesting for people.
Yeah. I want to learn more about it. I'll take it from this angle. There are two of the developers of the Scout game have come to me and told me they quit their jobs and just play the Scout game. And one of them is based in Africa and the other one is based in Brazil. And I think it's like, you can think about cost of living differences and then, but then also what, the value of work, right? Like Sella actually, I think their program, which is like, I'll just say the one great thing about Cello and one of the reasons why they're so effective with the Scout game is they have very good organized repositories with issues, and all of their issues are tagged. And so if you're a
Amazing.
new,
My
yeah, so
dream.
like it's the best I've seen. And then if you're a new developer, like maybe you just came from like Dev Bootcamp and you're like, how do I get started? Like I would totally point you to the Cello repos and look for the things that are tagged beginner because there are things that you can start to work on. Um, and so they have these great tagged issues, and it escalates in kind of severity. And then, like, you make more money as you tackle more severe things. And so, if you were thinking about this, like, I'm going to go quit my job, and I can tackle one $750 issue per week, and that's more than I make in my day job. It's like a pretty incredible opportunity. And so I'm here in Latin America. I live in Honduras, and I'm connected with a pretty small crypto dev community here. And I'm trying to expand here uh, and learn about more developers in LATAM. And then obviously, I think Africa is another super interesting market. And I do believe both of those are good markets for a scout game because the economics just make a lot of sense. It's a little opaque. I don't have any good insights into like how you break into these markets. I'll say like one of my learnings, man, from the beginning of the Scout game until just yesterday, is there's just not a lot of developers in crypto. Like we're just not there. Like when Base and when Jesse talks about bringing 1 million developers on chain, we're really so far away from that. It totally has to be the goal, and we're accelerating. But it's like I think in one of I saw somewhere, maybe it was like in a Base earnings report or something, they're targeting 20,000 developers this year, which really so small. If you think about like internet scale
Yeah.
software development or open source wide software development, 20,000 is a small number. And then that sort of trickles into like these local communities where it's actually very hard. I think if you're an AI developer and you live in New York City, probably everywhere in the world actually, you go to the AI meetups and you meet lots of other developers. Like crypto is for developers. It's still pretty small, and so yeah, if you can find a group of 200 developers, there's a great group out of Mexico, it's like 200 crypto developers. It's a very large org on this scale, and so I think there's going to be a lot of blocking and tackling to reaching out to these communities and finding their community leaders. I will say something I haven't explored yet, but I would be totally interested in is the WorldCoin app also has dominance in Africa, and there's just super interesting stuff there. And again, I think the higher level, if I zoom out, and again, I say this sitting here in Honduras, is like crypto is just so global, and like it just requires an entirely global mindset. There's no part of it that is like not global, and so like even like while we have a lot of emphasis as a community now on like what's happening in the U.S. regulatory environment, and I get it, it's sort of like a necessary thing that has to happen. It's like such a small part of like the global crypto community, and one of the things I love about this space.
Yeah, and like And I think with the examples that you gave, crypto is actually a necessary tool. It's not just an add-on. In a way, like if I was, I don't know, Oracle and I had an open source repo and I wanted to reward people from Africa for shipping code, I would have to use all these bank, fire trails, and I would pay like $100 for a transfer, probably, or even
Sure.
more, and it would take like 2 weeks and like so on. So I really like how it actually, I felt like YouTube and like Stack Exchange and all this kind of stuff all like leveled the playing field in a way that if you really want to learn something, you can learn it like
Sure.
everywhere. You just need the internet connection and a computer. That's the thing you have to get. But like if you have it, you can learn anything. But you couldn't earn like real money from everywhere. And now you can actually. We are not like there where everyone can earn, money everywhere, because like the market is not efficient yet. But I like about Scout Game that you actually like push it to this direction because like the more successful Scout Game is, let's say I'm like a guy in like you're in Honduras, let's say I'm in, I don't know, Dominican Republic, and I met these very cool developers, and I just recommend them, and they start making money, and I make money on the way. Like that
Yeah.
sounds amazing.
Yeah. I my dream for my dream for Scout Game, even in the short term, I think, is to onboard non-crypto developers, right? Because it's like it really works for all open source, and the open source pie is so big, and there's so much like high impactful work happening in the non-crypto side of open source. Like onboard an open source project that is not crypto aligned, like use some sort of smart wallet, privy, whatever, to onboard them with their GitHub account, and then just give them money for their contributions to Linux or something like that, right? As a way of like, yeah, there's just going to be a lot of ways we onboard people into crypto, but one of the ways is to onboard developers. And while retro funding is like very normalized, I think in our space, it is like completely unheard of outside of our space.
Yeah, that's
So
true.
if there's some world where we retro fund the core Linux devs for the last 10 years of work, I think that'd be like a pretty amazing moment.
Yeah, yeah, amazing. So, Chris, I have to get to another question, which is also the one that I'm only like I only know the answer partially here. Because I'd like to ask you, like, what brought you to Kiwi? Why? Like, because like I remember when you got into Kiwi, I was very surprised because you were a very big account on Farcaster. I think you are like a founder or co-founder of Purple DAO, right? Like you are like a
Yeah.
very popular person, and you still are. And I was like, okay, what Dan Romero said about getting people from Twitter was that it was very hard because if someone was big on Twitter, they were very non-interested in Farcaster because they already had a lot of audience and they could already find
Sure.
content. So why the hell you ended up on
Why did I get in?
Kiwi?
That's so funny. I don't really know the answer, but I can piece together some things. Um, uh, I just like here's just like another bit is like what do I do here, and then I went into the whole Scout Game thing. The other part is totally I just consider myself like a citizen of Ethereum, and I hope to be like a good steward of its values, and I don't know, like maybe evangelist or something like that. And so I'm super deeply interested in this stuff, which then brings me to like I'm in the Optimism Citizens House, and I care a lot about the superchain and superchain governance and all of those things. So that's like probably 50% of what I do, with the other 50% being a founder, right? So that's maybe some of the context. Then the other thing is. I can't imagine how early I was in Kiwi, but if you looked at my user ID, I bet it's very, very early. And I think part of it's that Warpcast and Farcaster at the time was very small. And so it was small, but like everything, every piece of software that came from it was great. There was like that moment where it was like, yeah, you tried everything because everything was kind of the best stuff happening in crypto in the often in like a hackathon type way. And So I remember that, which was like you guys were, in a world where maybe there were like, I don't know, a couple of dozen or, really a dozen real software projects. Yeah, Kiwi was one of them. And so it was like very easy to try. But I think like the hook then and then even today, like this part actually had never changed. Um, which is like there's one version of Valley Prop for Kiwi where it's Hacker News for crypto. And I think I'm super interested in that, and mostly, but it's not actually the hacker news component. That's just some mechanics that make it all work. But it's just like there's just still not great places to get like high quality crypto news that's intellectual and filtered through for no clickbait and spam. And also like I even like recently got sucked back into Twitter for whatever all the things, and then you get to like play into that algorithm, and it like manipulates you, and then like after a couple of days, I'm like, why do I feel so bad every day? Like like why am I angry? And it's like, oh, I let Twitter back into my life. And so one thing Twitter is great at, and I would say maybe even better than Warpcast, is just like all the news and the discussions people are talking about, and like Warpcast has its own version of that, but there's like still a lot of stuff going on Twitter. So I thought to myself, how do I break from Twitter? Because that's the part I love, but I don't want to open this app anymore. And so I went to RSS, right? Well, let me try an RSS reader. And then like, what are the sources I can pull into an RSS reader to give me high quality news about crypto? I mean, they're just, it's like, there's like Cointelegraph and CoinDesk, and one, I just don't think they're that great. Two, it's just a lot of content, and it's like, I don't need an article every day about the price of Bitcoin. And it's sort of,
Yeah.
at least in my early experiment, I'm not a long time reader of these things, but it doesn't really go deep enough into sort of the cutting edge tech stuff. So that's kind of always so RSS doesn't work. Twitter is kind of chaotic dark forest, and then Kiwi has always kind of served that role for me. Like I think since the minute I tried it, of just surfacing up like maybe the one thing I need to read that day, or like a handful of things I'm going to read that day or that week. Um, so I just found it because there were probably like 1,000 of us on Farcaster when you guys launched, and so it was easy to find. But then I think I took to it and stuck and still use it because I find it as just like a very high quality source of news that I literally don't think exists anywhere else in crypto. In other industries, in other tech, like I've always had that. And that's the other part of it, right? Which is like when I was doing iPhone apps, even when we were early, or virtual world stuff, there was always like professional news sources that were like good and a little bit edgy and could like feed you like the latest. But then I don't know, crypto feels like the news feeds you like a lagging 24 hours of what's interesting. Like I don't actually want to know about why someone thinks the price of Ethereum responded to what Jay Powell said yesterday. Like, I want to know about like, I don't know, the latest EIP that's going to like make a better user experience.
Yeah, that's like my heart melts when you say, that we actually help you discover quality stuff every day. And like an interesting point you made is that it's true that in all other industries you actually have this feed, like whether it's AI or like, like tech in general, you can go to Hacker News. Like I felt like in like I don't recall any like professional media for Ethereum in in a way that like even if you have something like that, it's often mixed up with other stuff. The only thing that I can recall was Week in Ethereum news, but it was like very Ethereum core development focus. It was less focused on like consumer apps, probably because it started when there was only infra and like
Yeah, yeah,
what could you talk about like this one OpenSea like or whatever like
yeah.
so I think yeah that's a very good point that like in other industries you have these media and like in Ethereum there are so many things, so I'm wondering like what are you actually excited about? Because you've been into NFTs, you've been into DAOs, you've been into grants. So, like, yeah, what makes you wake up in the morning and smile?
Yeah, cool. Like I'm still a huge Ethereum bull. I have like a very long vision. Like we need Ethereum in 20 years to reshape the world. Um, and so the daily fluctuations of the token prices or the dramas it's hard not to get sucked into that stuff, but it's like when I do start to get sucked into that stuff, I like remind myself like, why am I here? And it's like, oh yeah, because we're building societal technology that is needed maybe in a post nation state world or something like that. Um, so that being said, there's tons of stuff that I'm excited about. The in the very current like near term this year, this summer, I think like seeing all the account abstraction stuff proceed and the smart wallets and there's just such cool stuff happening. You know, yeah, I played with some stuff where you do the gasless transactions, or like quickly swap your USDC into something that earns yield. These smart wallets are super interesting and account abstraction is really great. And I think I think we talk about wallets a lot at Kiwi, but I think there's a version of smart wallets that is going to change the user experience and literally allow like anyone to join crypto and get on chain. So account abstraction is an interesting one to me. Super chain interoperability is amazing, and I expect to launch in the summer. And I think like when wallets catch up to it, the user will not have to care which super chain they're on. The wallets will just do everything correctly, and you won't need to care what chain your asset is on. So if you have USDC on Base and you want to go spend it on Ink or Unichain, that all just happens like very seamlessly. And I also think that's a precursor for L2 wide interoperability. So I believe if we have a long enough vision that account abstraction makes it really easy to use crypto, and then interop makes it like even more seamless to use the many chains that are going to be required to scale crypto. Um, and then the final thing is like all of the work that's done to like increase blob sizes and lower costs for L2s. So I, so to me, there's like a huge, just the, yeah, so I'm super excited about the near term future. And it's like, if you look at the token price of Ethereum as like a level of excitement, it looks like there's not a lot of excitement there. But if you look at what's happening, it's like, oh my God, it's gonna be first class internet experience by the end of the year. So as very short term stuff. I think in the longer kind of run, I'm much more interested in um, and maybe this is like I would maybe my research side going down this route is in privacy preserving technologies, and then it's painfully obvious to me that if we bring everyone on chain, people don't want their finances to be fully transparent. So stuff like some of the more compliant like privacy tools like Veil, I think is really interesting, or Railgun, or ways to use smart wallets to uh, spin up a new wallet address for every transaction, like Fluid Key does. I think that stuff is super interesting. The credentialed but anonymous is interesting to me, and I think I can have a healthy dose of skepticism on full anonymity, but the credentialed version, like a non-world, where you can only post with like an ETH credential if you hold enough ETH, or ZooPath from Zuzala, where you can maybe vote based on that you're a citizen, but you don't have to say which citizen you are. I think there's like a lot of super promising stuff around there. And then I'm seeing like some more easy use SDKs coming out around CK proofs, things like Noir and Succinct. Um, and then like the longer run here, which I think is actually long, is protocol level encryption or protocol level ZK stuff. Um, yeah, so I'm super interested in privacy. I think the state of the world now has me more interested in more thinking about lunar punk type things, which is how do we protect ourselves and empower ourselves. Yeah, how do we live in maybe a post-state world? So those technologies are kind of super interesting. And then I'll just close with like, there are like new forms of capital formation and coordination that I find super interesting. And some of this ties back to some of my DAO work. Um, but like Legion and Echo are like new ways for founders to raise money, that are kind of like a replacement for traditional venture. Uh, tries to fix some of the problems with the early ICO stuff. So I'm very interested in that, new ways to like raise capital. Then there's tools like, I mean, I think you and Tim are experts on these tools, but like things like splits now, where you can kind of run a company all on chain and have different tools you need to do payroll and all of that stuff, is starting to mature and look really good. And then finally, on the pure DAO side of things, I'm excited about Hats Protocol as a kind of more grown up way to manage shared internet resources.
Yeah, like I mean, I agree with a lot of things here, and I'm also excited about privacy. We went to Dev Conflict in Bangkok, and there was Rekmo speaking, the guy from WorldCoin, and he said, "Well, like the good thing about privacy is like if you apply it on a very general level, it's easy to accept it. But if you have just one specific application to be private, then it's very easy to point out, oh, this guy is shady because he uses this application, like Tornado Cash. Like if you have a button like private transaction on Ethereum that you could use to, I don't know, buy a present for your wife, let's say, uh, then it's fine, right? So like this protocol level encryption is something that makes me bullish because it reminds me of HTTPS, where it's just
100%.
like, normal thing.
The one easy way to like reclaim it's not easy for people, but the one way like you so we're talking about privacy on chain, but then it's really just like in our everyday tools that we're like in a privacy nightmare environment. And so I've switched from iOS to Graphene OS, which is like a more secure version of it's actually a more secure but privacy preserving version of Android. And then I use a Linux machine. But like one of the things is like I'm not trying to be fully anon. I just don't really want all of my information to go everywhere all the time. And that's just it's almost like we've been so normalized to just like, you should like, yeah, who has the right to your private information or any of your information? It's like we've been normalized. Everyone has the right to it. And it's like if someone was standing outside your bedroom window taking notes every day and like, you would think that was weird, but that's kind of what we do on the internet every day long, whether it's like your query going into ChatGPT or whatever you're doing with the Chrome browser. It's like someone standing outside your window, just sending all the information to to maybe not friendly parties.
Yeah, I'm also like very bullish on this privacy from the company perspective. Like there used to be this dashboard from MakerDAO where you could just like track all their books because everything is on chain. And of course, companies don't want to put all their spending on chain because I don't know, people could see their salaries and competitors could like overbid them and so on. But if you would be able to hide some of them, but be able to also like show them to auditors or like whoever, then it makes so sense. Like it seems so dumb that there is like people just keep the books for a year and then they have this audit people who just check if everything is correct. Like I have a friend who works at PwC and I'm like, well, it's so so dumb. Like why
Definitely.
do we even do it? Like it just like yeah, but so I'm really bullish that eventually we'll get all of that on chain, but at least some parts of it could be very very useful. And Chris, we have to wrap up, so I have this one question for you, and this is like a final one. So I'm wondering if there's anything non-crypto related that you have read or watched or listened to in the last few months that you could recommend to people.
Man. Good. So, funny because I knew this question was coming, but I did not prepare for it. But I do have the best possible answer. There is a new podcast called Dialectic by Jackson Dahl, and I mean, it's just kind of the only podcast I'm listening to now. It's really great. And so there's an episode with Jacob from Zora. There's an episode with Dan from Farcaster. There's an episode with Eugene Wei from most people know him from Status as a Service. Um, a ton of interesting people. Oh, Kipanu from Obsidian does an episode, and so he is very thoughtful. Jackson is very thoughtful, and he's having these conversations with people who are also very thoughtful. And it's not about what they're building or like their product. Besides for Dan, who like can turn everything back into a discussion about Farcaster.
Yeah.
But like like for Jacob, he's not talking about the news order. He's talking about his ideas around attention markets. For Kipano, he's not talking about Obsidian. He's talking about his approach to building tools, and it does the best job of any podcast I've listened to get behind the thinking of the person being interviewed. And so I always feel like it's always super insightful. But I finish every episode thinking like, oh, I now understand how that person thinks more. which actually it turns out is pretty rare. Once you experience it, you're like, oh, yeah. Usually people are kind of marketing something to some extent. I even talk a lot about Scout Game here. But his episode, he really gets into like the person behind the face and their approach to work, their approach to life, their philosophies. So yeah, it's called Dialectic from Jackson Dahl. I don't know if it's a cop out that there are some crypto episodes, but it's totally not about crypto, and many of the people interview don't really have any stake in the crypto game.
Yeah, thanks for that. That's actually a very interesting point that if you understand where this person is coming from, like what are their beliefs, values, and some mental models, you can kind of like understand what they could think about different things. Like you have this mental model of this person that you could have in the Senate in your head and just ask them questions. Yeah.
It's like a really great LLM trick is ask it to create a council for you. Like, hey, I want to think about like the risks of staking. Can you create a council of experts? And then it will come back and it will be like, we have Vitalik and we have Hayden, and then someone like whatever, some famous economist, and like Adam Smith is here, and then you have them have a roundtable discussion, and it's just like a super insightful way to like sort of wedge it into a topic. It's like, yeah, what would Adam Smith think about staking? And it's pretty interesting. So
Mm.
when you said your council in their head, that sort of reminds me of that.
Well, I never tried it. Like I used to ask it for like an opinion as someone, but never asked it to, become a counsel. But that
You
sounds
can totally do like
interesting.
a panel session. You're like reading a conference panel session. It's like it's a little bit vapid, but it is interesting to get the positions, and then you can dive in and be like, cool, make make Virgil Abloh speak more, and then yeah, it's just super interesting.
Nice. Yeah, Chris, so like thanks a lot for coming and I really enjoyed it and I was so happy to learn more about you beyond, like we spoke a lot on different occasions but never in that sense. So yeah, happy to have you here.
Yeah, awesome. I love to chat with you. I appreciate you having me.
Yeah. So yeah, have a good, I guess, what, afternoon in Honduras right now?
It's about lunchtime. Yeah.
Okay. So have a good lunch and yeah, see you later.
All right. I'll catch you later.
Bye bye.